I knew something was wrong with my body for months before I understood what it was. I knew what it was for 9 days before anyone told me. The person who told me wasn't my doctor. It wasn't my son. It was a woman named Shirley who sold pottery at the farmer's market in Dayton, Ohio on a cold Saturday morning in February. She looked at the mug I was carrying, asked to hold it, and told me what she saw. She almost didn't say anything at all. I had been an electrician for 38 years. I know how to look at a system and find what's wrong with it. I thought I knew how to read a situation. I was wrong about the one person I should have known best. My name is Gerald. I'm 64 years old. I live in a house in Dayton that I've owned for 28 years, the same house where my wife Donna and I raised 2 kids and planted tomatoes every summer along the back fence. Donna died 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 5 months from the first scan to the end. After she was gone, the house was still the same house, but it wasn't the same place. I kept doing the things I had always done because I didn't know what else to do. Coffee in the morning. The newspaper Saturdays at the local market the way Donna and I had done for 24 years together. My son Kevin worked as a warehouse supervisor in Columbus, about an hour and a half away. He called on Sundays. He talked about work, about his apartment, about whatever game had been on the night before. I didn't always have much to say back, but he called every week and I held onto that. My daughter Patrice lived 20 minutes from me. She came by without needing a reason. She was more her mother's child than she knew. In September, Kevin drove up for my birthday. He brought a bottle of bourbon and a box wrapped carefully in brown paper and twine, the kind of wrapping that takes effort. Inside was a ceramic mug, large, handmade, glazed in deep blue. My name was carved into the side, underneath it in smaller letters, a line I used to say to my kids when they were growing up. The work speaks for itself. I told him it meant something. He smiled in that easy way he'd had since he was a boy and told me to use it every day. Promise me, Dad. I promised. I used it every morning. Coffee at 7 at the kitchen table with the paper. The mug became part of the routine the way certain things do when you live alone. A small, reliable anchor to the day. I didn't think twice about it. That was the point. By mid-October, I started waking up nauseous, a low, dull feeling in the stomach that I told myself was something I'd eaten or a passing bug. I drank ginger tea. I cut back on coffee for a few days. It didn't clear. By November, it was there every morning without fail, and with it came a fatigue that settled in deep. I was sleeping 8 hours and waking up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The fatigue was the part that bothered me more. I had worked with my hands my whole life. I knew what tired felt like, and I knew what it felt like when tired didn't make sense. This didn't make sense. I went to my doctor in early December. He ran standard blood panels, checked my thyroid and liver function. Everything came back in a range he described as acceptable for my age. He told me to reduce stress. He asked about my diet. I went home, made soup, drank my morning coffee from my birthday mug, and told myself it was grief finding a new way to move through the body. But it didn't behave like grief. Grief I recognized. Grief came in waves, triggered by specific things. The smell of her garden gloves still hanging by the back door, a song on the radio, the particular way light fell across the kitchen on winter mornings. This was different. This was mechanical. Every morning, without variation, without trigger. Patrice noticed before I told her. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's instinct for things that are going quietly wrong. She came over on a Tuesday in January, watched me move around the kitchen, and said I looked like I hadn't slept in a month. I told her about the nausea and the fatigue and what my doctor had said. I watched her face do something careful and controlled, the way it did when she was deciding how worried to be. She made an appointment with a specialist in Dayton without asking me whether I wanted her to. The specialist was more thorough. She asked different questions, not just what I felt, but what I did every day, my environment, my routine, everything I ate and drank and handled regularly. She ordered blood work that went beyond the standard panels, the kind that tested for things most doctors didn't think to look for. When the results came back, she called me directly. Elevated heavy metal levels, antimony specifically, not at dangerous concentrations yet, but present in a pattern consistent with repeated low-dose exposure over several months. She asked me again about my environment, old pipes, paint, anything I handled regularly that might be the source. She told me to keep a detailed log of everything I consumed each day and come back in 3 weeks. I drove home and sat in the kitchen and looked at the ceramic mug on the dish rack, where it always dried after I washed it. I had a thought that was ugly enough and disloyal enough that I immediately tried to push it away. I pushed it away for 4 days. On a Saturday morning in late February, I went to the market the way I did most Saturdays. I had brought coffee from home in the mug, and I'd finished about half of it on the walk over. Near the end of the row, there was a woman named Shirley who sold pottery from a table lined with mugs and bowls and small vases. I had browsed her table before without buying anything. She had been working with ceramics for 30 years. You could see it in the way she handled pieces, unhurried, exact. She glanced at the mug in my hand while I was looking at a bowl on her table. Something shifted in her expression. She asked where I'd gotten it. I told her my son had given it to me as a birthday gift. She asked if she could look at it. I handed it over. She turned it slowly in her hands, brought it toward the light, tilted it to examine the interior. Then she set it down carefully on the edge of her table and looked at me. She said she didn't want to alarm me, but she had been working with ceramics for 30 years, and the glaze on the inside of that mug was not right. The color at the base of the interior, a faint yellowish cast, barely visible unless you knew to look, was consistent with a glaze mixture containing metallic compounds that had no place in food-safe ceramics. She had seen it before in poorly made pieces, but this one, she said, picking it up again for a moment, did not look like an accident. The exterior glaze was correct, only the interior, the surface in direct contact with whatever you were drinking, had been treated differently. She asked if I had been feeling well. I told her about the specialist, the elevated antimony levels. I watched her face confirm what I had already begun to understand, but had not yet let myself say. She told me to stop using the mug today, and to tell my doctor exactly where it came from. I left the market without buying anything. I walked back to my car and sat in the parking lot, with the mug on the passenger seat, the paper bag I'd brought for produce sitting empty in the back. I thought about Kevin handing me the box in September, the care in the wrapping, the way he had said, "Promise me," the way he had asked about the mug on almost every Sunday call since. "Still using it, Dad? Good, it suits you." Small questions woven into ordinary conversation. I had not noticed the pattern until I was sitting in a parking lot with the mug 2 feet away from me and 30 years of reading systems telling me exactly what I was looking at. I thought about the money. Donna and I had been careful people our whole lives. My pension, her life insurance, the equity in the house, investments she had managed better than I ever could. After she died, the estate attorney put the total at $347,000. I had rewritten my will the previous spring, split evenly between Kevin and Patrice. Kevin had been present at that meeting. I had not thought anything of it at the time. He was my son. Of course he would know. I drove home and put the mug in a paper bag and called Patrice. I told her everything in order, the specialist's findings, what Shirley had said at the market, what I had been thinking and hadn't let myself think until now. I am methodical by nature. I laid it out the way I would have traced a fault in a circuit, start to finish, no gaps. There was silence on the line. Then Patrice said she needed to tell me something she should have told me 2 months ago. In December, she said Kevin had been asking unusual questions about the estate. Specific questions. What happened if I became incapacitated? Whether a medical power of attorney would supersede the will? How assets were managed if the primary holder was no longer competent to make decisions? He had framed it as concern. She had told herself it was just Kevin being practical, being the financially minded one. She had almost called me. She had talked herself out of it. She said she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She arrived within 20 minutes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and worked through it, the way she had worked through problems since she was a child, focused, deliberate, without panic. She said the first thing we needed was documentation. The specialist's records, the blood work results, Shirley's contact information. The mug itself needed to go to a lab. Then she said something I was not thinking clearly enough to say myself. She said we needed to go to the police before we contacted Kevin. If we called him first, we gave him time to prepare, time to get rid of anything, time to build a story. She said she knew what I was hoping for. She understood it. But we had to protect ourselves first. She was right. I knew she was right even as something in me fought against it. We went to the Dayton Police Department on Monday morning. We brought the documentation and the mug in the paper bag. I gave a statement that took about 45 minutes and left me more tired than I had felt in months. A different kind of tired than the antimony, but not entirely separate from it. A detective named Cowell, quiet and deliberate. told us they would have the mug tested through their own lab and that we should not contact Kevin in the meantime. She asked if I could continue behaving normally, taking his Sunday calls, giving nothing away. I said I would try. That Sunday he called at the usual time. We talked for 20 minutes. The weather, a game he had watched. At one point he asked about my health. I told him I was managing, that the doctors were still running some tests. There was a brief pause before he said he hoped everything came back normal and that he was thinking of me. I said I appreciated that. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time without turning on any lights. The lab results came back 9 days later. The interior glaze tested positive for antimony trioxide at concentrations that, when leached into hot liquid over repeated use, would deliver a steady low-dose accumulation into the body. Detective Cowell told me this was not a manufacturing defect. The exterior of the mug was standard food-safe ceramic. Only the interior had been treated differently, deliberately, she said, and with some care taken to make the exterior appear correct. A search warrant was executed on Kevin's apartment in Columbus. In a closet in his home office, they found a sealed container holding a small quantity of antimony compound. They found browser history going back 16 months, searches about heavy metal poisoning, symptom timelines, how long antimony remained detectable in the body, inheritance law in Ohio. They found emails with a ceramics artist in another state who had been paid to produce the mug according to a specific interior glaze formula Kevin had provided, described in the correspondence as a custom decorative effect for a piece of art, not for use with food or drink. The ceramics artist, when contacted, said he had no idea the piece would ever be used for drinking. He cooperated immediately. Kevin was arrested on a Thursday afternoon. Patrice called me when it happened. I was in the backyard, turning soil in the bed along the back fence, something I hadn't been able to bring myself to do since Donna died. I sat down on the old wooden bench beside the garden and listened to my daughter's voice and felt something move through me that I still have difficulty naming precisely. It wasn't relief, though relief was part of it. It was the particular weight of a thing you suspected, but hoped was wrong, finally confirmed. The body's response to certainty after months of not knowing. My health improved once I stopped using the mug. The specialist monitored me for 6 months. My levels returned to normal. The fatigue lifted in stages. The mornings became bearable first. Then I started sleeping through the night. Then one morning in June, I walked out to the backyard and realized I was thinking about the garden instead of about being tired. I planted that bed in spring. Tomatoes, green beans, a row of basil. Donna's choices mostly. Patrice came over most Saturdays. We had dinner together and talked about real things, and the silences between us were the comfortable kind. The trial took place the following spring. I sat in the courtroom for the sentencing. Kevin looked smaller than I had expected, which I had always assumed was something people said, until I sat there and found it was simply true. He looked at me once from across the room, then looked away. He received 11 years. The judge cited the premeditation, the duration of the offense, and the use of a professional intermediary to obtain the compound. I drove home from the courthouse alone. I took the long way through the older neighborhoods, past the industrial district where I had spent most of my working life. I thought about all the mornings I had shown up to a job with a thermos and done what needed doing. I had not known then how much those ordinary mornings were worth. You rarely do. The following Saturday I went back to the market and found Shirley at her table. I bought a bowl from her, dark blue, simple, food safe throughout. She asked how things had turned out. I told her the short version. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said she was glad she had said something. She told me she had almost not. I asked her why she had. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said she had learned a long time ago that the things you almost don't say are usually the exact things that need saying. Her mother had told her that. She said she tried to live by it. I thanked her. I meant it in a way that was difficult to fully explain, so I said it simply and let it stand. I still go to the market on Saturday mornings. The garden this year is the best it's been in a long time. I'm 64 years old. I was an electrician for 38 years. I know something about finding the fault in a system, about tracing back through the connections until you find the one thing that shouldn't be there. What I know now that I didn't know a year ago is this. The people who save you are rarely the ones you expect. Pay attention to the ones who almost don't speak. And when you find yourself almost not saying something, say it anyway. She asked if she could look at it. I handed it over. She turned it slowly in both hands, brought it toward the light coming through the market awning, and tilted it until she could see down into the interior. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she set it down carefully on the edge of her table and looked at me with an expression I had seen before. The expression of someone who has noticed something and is deciding how to say it. She told me she didn't want to alarm me, but she had been working with ceramics for 30 years, and the glaze on the inside of that mug was not right. The color at the base of the interior, a faint yellowish cast barely visible unless the light caught it at the correct angle, was consistent with a glaze mixture containing metallic compounds that had no place in food-safe ceramics. She had seen it before, she said, usually in cheaply made pieces, imported without proper standards. But this one was different. The exterior glaze was correct, properly formulated, food-safe, only the interior had been treated differently. The surface that contacted whatever you were drinking. She asked if I had been feeling well. I told her about the specialist, the elevated antimony levels, the log I had been keeping. I watched her face as I spoke, and I could see her arriving at the same place I had been circling for 4 days without letting myself land. She told me to stop using the mug, today, and to tell my doctor exactly where it came from. I left the market without buying anything. I walked back to my car and sat in the parking lot with the mug on the passenger seat. I had spent 38 years as an electrician. The work trained you to trace things backward, to start with what wasn't functioning and follow the connections until you found the source. You learned not to assume. You learned to look at what was actually there rather than what you expected to find. I sat in that parking lot and did what I had been trained to do, and I did not like what the connections showed me. Kevin had given me the mug in September. He had wrapped it carefully, driven 2 hours to deliver it in person, and asked me to promise I would use it every day. I had promised. I had used it every morning without missing a day. By mid-October, I was waking up nauseous. By November, the fatigue had settled in so deeply that 8 hours of sleep left me feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My doctor had found nothing. A specialist had found antimony at levels consistent with repeated low-dose exposure over several months. A woman who had spent 30 years working with ceramics had looked at the mug for 30 seconds and identified a deliberate anomaly in the interior glaze. And Kevin, on nearly every Sunday call since September, had asked about the mug, still using it, Dad. Good, it suits you. Not once, not twice, almost every week. I thought about the estate, $347,000. Donna and I had built that over a lifetime. My pension, her life insurance, the equity in this house, investments she had managed with more patience and discipline than I ever had. After she died, the estate attorney had put the number on paper, and it had sat there, concrete and real. I had rewritten my will the previous spring, split evenly between Kevin and Patrice. Kevin had been in the room when the attorney laid out the structure. I had not thought twice about it. He was my son. I thought about what Donna would have said. She had always been better than me at reading people, at noticing the small things that didn't quite fit. I had spent 2 years missing her judgment on 100 ordinary things. Sitting in that parking lot, I missed it more than I had in a long time. I drove home and put the mug in a paper bag and called Patrice. I told her everything in the order it had happened, the specialist's findings, what Shirley had said. What I had been thinking since I left the market and what I had been refusing to think for the 4 days before that. I am a methodical by nature. 38 years of tracing circuits teaches you to present information in sequence, without gaps, without jumping to the conclusion before you've laid out the path. I laid it out. There was a silence on the line when I finished. Not a long one, but the kind that has weight. Then Patrice said she needed to tell me something she should have told me 2 months ago. In December, she said Kevin had been asking her unusual questions about the estate. Specific questions: what happened legally if I became incapacitated, whether a medical power of attorney could supersede the terms of a will, how financial assets were typically managed when the primary account holder was no longer competent to make decisions. He had framed it as concern. He had said he wanted to understand the situation, in case something happened, in case he needed to act quickly. She had told herself it was just Kevin being practical. He was the financially minded one, always had been. She had almost called me in December. She had thought about it seriously. Then she had talked herself out of it, told herself she was reading too much into a conversation that had a reasonable explanation. She said she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her that what she had done was exactly what a reasonable person would do with information that was ambiguous and painful and pointed toward something you didn't want to be true. She arrived at the house within 20 minutes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I watched her work through it the way she had worked through hard problems since she was a child, focused, deliberate, without panic. She said the first thing we needed was documentation. The specialist's records, the blood work results, Shirley's full name and contact information. The mug itself needed to go to an independent lab. Then she said the thing I had not been thinking clearly enough to arrive at myself. She said we could not call Kevin before we went to the police. If we contacted him first, we gave him time to prepare, time to get rid of anything that shouldn't exist, time to build a story that fit the facts we had and left him room to move. She said she knew what I was hoping, that there was an explanation I hadn't considered, that the mug was simply a badly manufactured piece, and the pattern I had traced in that parking lot was the product of grief and too much time alone. She said she understood that hope, but we had to protect ourselves before we gave it room to breathe. She was right. I knew she was right, even as the part of me that was still his father pushed back against it. We went to the Dayton Police Department on Monday morning. We brought the documentation in a folder and the mug in the paper bag. I gave a statement that ran to about 45 minutes. A detective named Cowell, quiet, methodical, the kind of person who wrote things down before she responded, told us they would have the mug tested through their own forensic lab and that we should not contact Kevin in the meantime. She asked whether I could continue to behave normally, take his Sunday calls, give nothing away. I said I would try. That Sunday he called at the usual time. We talked for 20 minutes. He asked about my health. I told him I was managing, that the doctors were still working through some test results. There was a pause, brief, the kind you might not notice if you weren't listening for it. And then he said he hoped everything came back normal and that he was thinking of me. I said I appreciated that. After we hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. I thought about all the Sunday calls since September. The easy conversation. The questions about the mug woven in so naturally I had not registered them as a pattern until I had a reason to look. I had always believed that the people who meant to harm you announced themselves somehow, that there was a signal you could read if you were paying attention. I had been paying attention for 38 years of working life, and I had not seen this. That was the thing I kept returning to, sitting there in the dark. Not the anger, though the anger was present. Not the grief, though that was present too. The simple fact that I had not seen it, that I had used the mug every morning for 5 months, kept my promise, and had no idea. The lab results came back 9 days later. The interior glaze of the mug tested positive for antimony trioxide at concentrations that, when leached into hot liquid over repeated daily use, would deliver a consistent low-dose accumulation into the body over time. Detective Cowell called me directly. She told me this was not a manufacturing defect. The exterior of the mug had been correctly glazed with food-safe ceramic compounds, only the interior had been formulated differently. The distinction was deliberate, she said, and had required specific knowledge to execute. A search warrant was issued for Kevin's apartment in Columbus. What they found: a sealed container in the back of a closet in his home office, holding a small quantity of antimony compound. Browser history going back 16 months. Searches about heavy metal toxicity, symptom progression timelines, how long antimony remained detectable in the bloodstream, inheritance law in Ohio, email correspondence with a ceramics artist in another state, in which Kevin had commissioned a custom mug and provided a specific formula for the interior glaze, describing it in the emails as a decorative patina effect intended for display, not use. The ceramics artist, when contacted by investigators, said he had produced the piece according to the specifications provided. He said he had no reason to believe it would ever be used for drinking. He had understood it to be a decorative object. He cooperated fully and immediately. Kevin was arrested on a Thursday afternoon. Patrice called me when it happened. I was in the backyard turning soil in the bed along the back fence, something I hadn't been able to make myself do since Donna died. I sat down on the wooden bench beside the garden and listened to my daughter's voice. What I want to say about the months after the arrest is that it was not simple, and I think the honest thing is to say so plainly, I still loved my son. I say that not as a performance of grace, but because it was true and because I did not know what to do with it. The love did not go away when I understood what he had done. It stayed exactly where it had always been, and what he had done stayed alongside it, and I had to learn to hold both of them in the same space at the same time. That is one of the things that cannot be explained until you're inside it. What I did with that was this: I did not intervene in the legal process. I did not write a letter asking for consideration. I did not take his calls from the county jail, though he called 4 times in the first 2 weeks. I was not ready for that. I needed to be well first. I needed to know what I actually wanted to say before I said anything. My health improved once I stopped using the mug. The specialist monitored me for 6 months. My antimony levels returned to normal range. The fatigue lifted in stages. First, the mornings became bearable. Then I started sleeping through the night. Then one morning in June, I walked out to the backyard and realized I was thinking about what to plant, not about how tired I was. I planted the bed that spring tomatoes, green beans, a row of basil along the edge. Donna's choices, mostly. I planted them because I had planned the year before and hadn't managed it. And because putting seeds in the ground felt like the right response to a year of slow damage, a deliberate, ordinary act of continuing forward. Patrice came over most Saturdays. We had dinner together and talked about real things. Her work, the garden, the state of things. She had carried guilt for months about the questions Kevin had asked her in December, the warning she had almost given me and hadn't. We talked about it directly once, and I told her what I believed, that she had responded exactly the way a reasonable person responds to information that is ambiguous and painful and points towards something you don't want to be true. She had not failed me. When it mattered, she had found me. She is her mother's daughter, and I am grateful every day that she is in the world. The trial took place the following spring. I sat in the courtroom for the sentencing. Kevin looked smaller than I remembered, which I had always assumed was a thing people said until I was sitting there and found that it was simply accurate. He looked at me once from across the room, then looked away. He received 11 years. The judge cited the premeditation, the duration of the offense, and the use of a paid intermediary to obtain and apply the compound. I drove home from the courthouse alone. I took the long way through the older parts of the city, past the industrial district where I had spent most of my working years. I drove slowly and thought about all the mornings I had shown up to a job with a thermos and done what needed to be done, and how little I had understood then about what those mornings were worth. You rarely know the value of the ordinary days until you've spent time trying to get them back. The following Saturday, I went back to the market and found Shirley at her table. I bought a bowl from her, dark blue, simple, food safe throughout. Nothing wrong with it anywhere. She asked how things had turned out. I told her the short version. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said she was glad she had said something. She told me she had almost not. I asked her why she had. She thought about it. Then she said she had learned a long time ago that the things you almost don't say are usually the exact things that need to be said. Her mother had told her that. She said she tried to live by it. I thanked her. I meant it in a way I couldn't fully put into words, so I said it simply and let it stand. There are situations where the people closest to us are also the ones with the most to gain from our absence. Most of the time, nothing comes of it. Occasionally, someone acts on it. The distance between those two outcomes is often a single moment. Someone who notices something small, decides to speak, and does.